this is not going to be a complete progression. There's infinite number of ways you can go with this. I like to start with people who are standing still, and so they can feel their balance from a standing position. And sometimes they're wondering, why am I not moving yet? And the reason is because we want to establish ideal balance of striking the ball and moving, rotating without your feet in motion. And then we'll add a little bit of motion. They have to take a couple of simple steps. And then we'll start to work with different types of so-called contact moves. They have to do a shuffle and then turn, or a turn, then shuffle, or a crossover step. So they're doing more types of movements so that they can be ready to move in more types of directions. And then we start to work on getting out of the way of the ball. So one thing I do is I have them put their hands out like so. Here, let me get one hand in there. I have them put their arms out like so, and I say, well, if the ball is coming inside of that, then you have to move away from it. And one of the trickiest shots is the ball that is ever so slightly to your backhand, and it's also short in the court, and you have to move quickly diagonally forward but away from the ball so that you can hit a forehand. If you think that through, you'll understand what I'm saying. But basically it's counterintuitive, because your first instinct might be to come and prepare for a backhand, but you gain a huge advantage if you move that way, diagonally forward, and hit a forehand. So these types of decision-making things come in, and that's where the initial reaction to what is that incoming ball starts coming in. So as we go further along, it becomes a lot more about recognizing the incoming shot, quickly making the right decisions, and then the decision-making is the #1 factor in how well balanced you're going to be.
Fantastic examples on your end. I just wanted to add some more, let's say, examples on my end. I talked about starting for dynamic because I do consider dynamic balance as the final, let's say, stages, and then progressively I want the ball as well to be involved, and of course starting from easy and going to more difficult steps. Of course I'm gonna add into the progression everything which increases the level of instability. So the interaction, for example, not only the ball, but tactical or strategic scenario in which the player is, and of course, at the end, the interaction with an opponent. Starting from the very beginning, I like to tease players because I create some very unrealistic, but in a way just to provide them the feeling of stability or instability. Mm-hmm. I ask them, for example, to produce a slow motion movement. So please show me what the forehand is. And then of course the player has to recover image of the forehand or whatever. So it might either be a serve, a second serve, first serve, and he has to or she has to replicate this movement in slow motion. This player has to have the full control his or her body during the entire motion. I like to observe the way the player, kids, even good players, play that movement like an actor, discovering the differences between controlling and automatic. So where the brain is and where the cognitive part is, where the thought is. So I'm gonna check over whether balance is guaranteed over time. And when there is a technical breakdown, anytime there is during that movement something that breaks down, so falls apart.
Let me break in for a second, because one of the things that's amusing and annoying at the same time is you'll see a player make an error, and as a coach, you can clearly see that the poor footwork had them out of balance, and that was the reason for the error. But then what does the player do? They stop and they take a practice stroke as though there was something wrong with their technique. I think I've only seen that, about 50,000 times in 30 years, where clearly the footwork and the balance were a problem, but the player assumes that it had to do with their forehand or their backhand technique. And unfortunately, I think that that's just a symptom of poor coaching, that they haven't received coaching enough to understand footwork and balance. Many coaches are obsessed with the technique of forehands and backhands, and they ought to be more interested in balance.
It was very interesting because, of course, it depends, of course, on the goals that you have in your lesson, or actually what you want to achieve with your intervention. I start teasing them because all of a sudden I start pushing them and they have to maintain that particular position. I'm very, very attentive, paying attention to where they're trying to compensate. If they have the right balance, they start at least realizing there is kind of a stability and balance that they have is very much different than balance that their bodies can produce. To superpose these two concepts, and they start thinking that probably what they have done during their tennis careers was very much influenced by this dichotomy, by this big distinction. And this is very, very funny because they start realizing a world of differences. Another game that I like to play in these teaching progressions, I ask the player, for example, to freeze at the end of the preparation. So first of all, they have to have a real and very precise concept of end of preparation. Once the concept of preparation is there, it's a clear concept. In order to get that particular phase of the mechanics of the movements, what they do with their body if they want to remain in balance.
Well, yeah, and one thing that's outstanding about that is what people become to realize is, oh my goodness, I am not on balance in my preparation. And they start to realize that the demand is that they have to prepare much earlier if they're going to get there. And so then they also have to respond more quickly to the ball out of the opponent's racket. And when they can do that, then they have got a lot more time. I generally say this: if one player, when the ball bounces, is able to be relatively in the position from which they're going to strike the ball at the time that it bounces, then they're still in control of the rally, or at least they're neutral. But if the other player hasn't achieved that state of equilibrium by the time the ball bounces, then they're giving up an advantage, or there's an advantage to be had if the other player can take advantage of it.